Afternoon, everybody. My name is Steve Isherwood. I am Chief Executive of the ISE, and welcome to the latest in our series of webinars. And today we're going to be talking all about virtual recruitment strategies. I've got a really excellent set of panelists lined up that I'll introduce in just a moment or two. If this is your first time on an ISE webinar, then welcome. You'll all be on mute because we get quite a high number of attendees, so and we try to avoid having everybody talking over each other, but we really would like you to interact with the webinar. So on this platform, there is a questions box, and so our panel are geared up and prepared to answer your questions. So if you've got anything you'd like to ask, please pop it into the question box, and I will relay it to the panel. Some of them will ask as we go along, but I've also left some time at the end because sometimes it just gets a little bit difficult to multitask from my end. If you are asking the questions, please try and keep the question brief because I do have to read it from a screen. Whilst also sort of keeping an eye and hosting the conversation. So yes, give me a brief if you could. I would appreciate that. We also record all our webinars, so this webinar is automatically recorded. You will get a link to that automatically from the platform later this afternoon, so you can go back and revisit the recording. Also, as part of our response to the coronavirus crisis, we've made all our podcasts and webinars open access to anybody, members or not. So if you would like to share it with colleagues or peers, then please feel free to do that. We're very keen, to spread and share learning to help sort of everybody navigate their way through all the issues that we're dealing with. So let's get stuck into the content. Let's do some introductions first of all. So I'll go around people as I see them on my screen. Rachel, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Hi everybody, I'm Rachel Kershaw, the Head of Recruitment at Police Now.
Thanks, Rachel. Jackie?
Hi everyone, I'm Jackie Newton. I'm the Head of Learning and Development at Post Office.
Jenny, would you like to go next?
Hello, I'm Jenny Austin from the Graduate Recruitment Bureau.
And last but no means least, Alan.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, I'm Alan Bourne. I'm founder of the Assessment.
Fantastic, excellent. Okay, well, let's get straight into the meat of the webinar. Jackie, can I come to you first? And I was just going to ask you, what are the challenges that you are facing at the moment, moving your activities online?
So I guess for us, just for context, the biggest impact for recruitment of graduates this year was our assessment centres, which is the last part of the recruitment process, and we deliver those face-to-face in our office in London. So I guess we could categorise the challenges into three key areas. The first is the office environment itself. So we know from historical data that where the candidates preferred, I guess, choice because of the office, they find it quite surprising to visit a modern contemporary environment, not necessarily something you would associate with post office, which encourages collaboration and a really great relaxed, I guess, sense of working. So that was number one, the office environment. I guess building on that, we're definitely thinking about the culture. So how do you replicate the ethos of your organisation and what it stands for? And again, we do that both informally and formally in the office environment. That would include meeting some of our internal networks, seeing and observing indicators of our support for the armed forces and also our charitable work. So really getting that culture of the organisation across is something that you really have to think about if you don't have that visit to your support centre, your office. And then finally, I guess for me, it would be the interaction. So virtual delivery by default is a lot more structured. So really having to consider having the right balance between keynote speakers, time for conversation, and time for facilitation. And I guess building on that, just considering how you might pick up on the non-verbal body language signs, both from how the assessments are going themselves, but for individual candidates, not everyone's an extrovert, and online that can be a little bit more challenging and needs a little bit more thought. So they're the three main things, I think, for us.
And I should have asked you this first, actually, but Jackie, so the impact of coronavirus on your on the post office. So you're still having to recruit then? It's is it very much still business as usual?
It's a balance. I mean, I guess if we go back a little way, the impact on coronavirus for us was twofold. First of all, how do we maintain service? We're one of the largest franchise organisations in Europe. So how do we maintain service and for all of our communities across the UK? But secondly, how do we then convert all of our support functions to a remote working model? That was really challenging. And I guess building into your question, Alan, just thinking about the impact of COVID, we're now considering, along with government guidelines, the impact on trading. So actually it was a challenge to consider, should we recruit this year in terms of graduates? And we had quite a few conversations with our executive team, because we did pause at the beginning. We were due to actually deliver the assessment centres in March, and we paused, and then we had conversations, you know, as trading, you know, wasn't delivering as you would expect, along with everyone else, should we go ahead? But as an organisation, we're still passionate about bringing in young talent, particularly. So I guess overall recruitment will be scaled down, but there will still be a need for recruitment. And our CEO was really passionate about bringing in that fresh thinking.
That's really good to hear, and I think it's one of the things that we've been quite keen to get the message out, which is that there are organisations still recruiting. I think there's a real danger that students think the market's sort of shut down, you know, everything's doom and gloom. I mean, we can't pretend that it's not a tough environment out there, but both yourselves and of course police now are still very, very active in that market. So just going back actually to the sort of the work that you have been doing. I mean, apart from the obvious difference about, you know, having something online versus face to face, but what are the main differences between the approaches that you're taking?
So in terms of the graduates, should we continue about the graduates themselves rather than broader recruitment? Because I guess that would be my specialism.
Yeah, that would be great if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, not at all. So I guess again, I could categorise that into three key sections. So first of all, time. If you're delivering any kind of assessment centres, and particularly virtually, with delivering by a platform, time is a lot more structured, so you lose some of the flexibility. So you really have to think about and manage the time, and it's a lot. You need a lot more thought and planning to be able to change timings of certain activities in the moment. So a lot of thought goes into that. It's totally achievable, and you know, Jenny helped us do a really brilliant job. But there is a lot more thought. You can't just, you know, pause everything, move everything around as you would in a face-to-face environment. Second, I guess it's the tech. So I guess there's a couple of things there. First of all, making sure it's all going to work on the day. And then really testing again. We did a lot of testing, but we still had a few technical issues, both from candidates and from our end, for our assessors on the day. So having a backup plan with that is really important, and lots of testing. Don't assume everyone has the same software, the same applications. Just make sure you're working through that, and different organisations have different securities set up as well, so just really making sure about that. And then I guess finally it would be the content itself. So we had to adapt our assessment centres at pace once we got this decision to go ahead. And it's just thinking about actually how do you replicate your activities to maintain purpose but also engagement, and both are equally important. And it can be a bit more staid in a virtual environment if you don't give it a little bit more thought.
So you take people all the way through to offer stage virtually? Yeah,
everything's been done virtually the whole way through, and the final stage for us, I guess, is our successful applicants. We're talking to tomorrow or Friday actually to do the final handover from Graduate Recruitment Bureau to Post Office, but they have accepted offers.
That was me, that was my telephone going off. It was a cardinal sin of not putting my phone. I should know by now, having done so.
I'm glad it wasn't mine, Alan.
So it sounds like you had to work at real pace. I'd imagine the pressure to get those kind of programs turned around has been a real challenge. Do you think you have to evolve it more as you go on? Is it something that actually, or you're quite happy with I guess that's sort of the process that you've ended up with now?
That's a good question. I think it's a balance of what works at the time and depending on the kind of recruitment that you do. And I guess what we know is it's achievable. And certainly if you think about the impact of travel and so on, and maybe people being a little bit more reluctant now, I think it's about having a flexible approach and not a one size fits all. Yeah, you can do a really good job, and with some thought you can absolutely replicate and manage to do everything virtually, but equally that doesn't mean we wouldn't go back to the physical environment when it's right, depending on the situation.
It's interesting you mentioned the environment piece. We did a webinar with Siemens a little while ago that was focused on attraction and marketing, but they said it's such a key part of the recruitment experience, actually visiting the workplace and where you're going to work. And
yeah,
there's really so much you can do sort of virtually to get that sort of culture piece over to candidates.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jenny, just turning to you. Obviously, there's Post Office, one of your clients, but also you've got a broad range of clients. So you must be dealing with, I guess, a few different and a variety of processes at the moment, but also quite a wide range of students actually applying to organisations. Are you finding anything that applicants need to do differently in order to preparing for a virtual process to what they would do normally?
Yeah, so I think it potentially mimics a little bit of what Jackie was saying as well about employers. Is I think a huge amount of it is kind of time, is preparation is really, really key. I think where you may prepare for an assessment centre as a candidate, just making sure you've got everything and you know where you're going. I think the one thing we've really found with candidates is making sure, like Jackie said, test your equipment, test it on a couple of devices, make sure you're really, really prepared. Logging in at least a good day before if you have access to it, just to make sure your logins are working. And I think there's that extra piece of, I think, students and graduates know if they're going to like a face-to-face event, they're going to need to maybe wear a suit and be smart on how to be presentable. But there's that extra nervousness around, if you're at home, making sure you've told your flatmates so that they're not wandering in, making sure, you've got a decent environment that you're in. But I guess things like turning off your phone, even those small elements that I think they're more conscious of face to face, which there is that reassurance piece that they maybe need up front. And then I guess the sort of second key thing is it can be very difficult virtually for candidates, and we're recommending actually quite a lot to sort of practice beforehand, even if it is just with your friend, having group conversations. There's that element of, supporting the kind of more wallflower or the shyer candidates to not be afraid to speak up, but equally that balance of, maybe the really confident ones that even in a normal face-to-face environment might actually kind of potentially overpower group situations. It's probably even more so in a virtual environment, and for them to be really conscious of stopping and thinking, okay, well, who am I speaking to here? Taking more breaths, pausing. So yeah, I guess it is just that awareness of being in a virtual world, like you say, and actually preparing for it and allowing more time for things.
And do you think there's anything that employers need to do differently in how they interact with students in the virtual environment?
Yeah, definitely. I think, like you said, we work with a huge amount of different organisations. So we work with SMEs through to, huge, large-scale volume recruiters across the country. And to be honest, we pretty much cover every sector. And I think the real common denominator we've seen with anything done virtually, but definitely, like Jackie said, especially from like an assessment centre or assessments generally, is the upfront investment, not necessarily with money and paying for super snazzy technology, but it's actually your time. I think we've seen a lot of people try and rush things or underestimate maybe just how long you maybe need to think about things. It doesn't need to be months on end of overthinking stuff either, which we probably see. But yeah, it's just thinking about, okay, well, what are we actually looking for from this event? What would we usually cover? What materials may get the best out of graduates in that kind of environment and be most conducive, and potentially adapting some exercises. So even things like group tasks where, big volume recruiters may have group activities of, 15 to 20 candidates, is actually, maybe you're better off doing it with kind of 8 to 10 candidates and replanning your scheduling and stuff. So it's just allowing that element of time, and also to, I guess, again, maybe kind of what Jackie was saying, and Stephen yourself there as well, around that branding and marketing piece up front, is on a virtual event, you really lose that culture and your brand awareness, you know, as you would face to face, and you kind of lose those small conversations or the things they may notice in your office space. I know Jackie and Laura were mentioning, you know, last year's events, the graduates noticed the Pride lanyards, and actually there were a few comments around that which you lack. So again, it's thinking about with your whole recruitment process, right from the beginning, what are you doing to really build that brand awareness and that engagement with students, perhaps more so than usual, making it human, you know, telling them things can go wrong on the day, you know, as you just said, Stephen, you know, your phone goes off, a dog may bark or whatever, so it's kind of making that reassurance for candidates. And then I guess the only final really big piece is reassurance for candidates. I guess it used to be maybe 2 or 3 years ago a kind of, oh, we don't want to over prepare candidates because we've given them too much, making their life easier. And I think we've seen a shift to actually that preparation can really support candidates, you know, in getting more from them. And I think that's even more important now, is they're nervous. They don't know what it's going to look like, how it's going to feel. And we've seen some really good things. I know Post Office were fab at just making sure they really gave a lot of information up front to candidates, really, you know, showing them what the technology is going to be like, what kind of questions they may get. And other clients we've had are doing sort of, you know, pre-recorded demonstrations of what the technology looks like, and also building their brand into that. So it kind of marries the two together. So there's quite a lot of things I think employers can think about if they just allow that time, and that's definitely common across any brand, any industry.
Interesting you're talking about group exercise. I've had we've got some questions coming through already. So Jenny, Phil's asked a question around actual connectivity issues during ACs, and I guess it's the technical side of things. So does that cause any problems? You know, because we're all getting used to technology, but it's not always seamless, is it? Is that something you've had to deal with it? And if you have, how have you seen it being dealt with?
Yeah, definitely. I think group situations probably the whole way through lockdown, and as soon as this all happened, was probably the one thing people go, how on earth do we replicate that well? I think that's the one element still that we may, you know, struggle, I guess, to ever get as good as you would face to face. But yeah, technology wise, definitely that comes down to preparation and reminding candidates, you know, try and be somewhere with a good internet connection, really test it beforehand. But also definitely something we noticed with Post Office is actually saying to candidates in the beginning of the day in a candidate welcome is things go wrong, don't panic.
It doesn't matter.
Try not to let it throw you. Exactly, and actually that making it human part.
Yeah, and that's so important, building on that, Jenny. You know, just saying it's okay, things happen. It's outside of your control, and we'll work with you and we'll support you. And we actually had a couple of people lose connectivity even during their interview, and they were brilliant. And they just came back on and picked straight up because we're reminded a few times, it's okay, that's not something we can handle, you know, if you can't manage it, it's fine. So I think you do have to be a little bit more relaxed from my experience. And it is okay if you have a bit of noise, you can't help it, you know, as long as you've done everything you can to prepare. Those things are outside of your control. It's just giving everyone confidence that that's okay, and you're not going to be marked, judged, whatever on that element. Hope that helps.
And I do think there could be a concern from kind of really big volume recruiters, like you say, Stephen, if maybe 1 or 2 candidates can't make a group, you know, there is that panic of, oh God, what do we do? You know, now it kind of throws the whole day. I think my tip is just allow more time than usual. It isn't going to give a massive unfair advantage now, you know, giving yourself maybe an extra 15-minute window or, you know, 20 minutes just to allow for those challenges that can happen. But, you know, actually, genuinely, surprisingly, we've run some days of up to kind of 40 candidates and 5 days in a row solid, and actually you get a lot less than you think. If anything, grads are actually probably better than the assessors. Classic.
Well, yeah, so that doesn't surprise me at all. Yeah, another question that's come through. Yes, definitely. And this is, and we touched a little bit on diversity a few minutes ago, and I wonder if you want to deal with this with Jackie. So a question asking is, you know, do you think diversity will be impacted by doing assessment virtually, either in a good way or a not so good way, possibly?
I think that's a really good question. I think if I answer it in 2 ways, for us, diversity and inclusion is so important that we made sure one of our keynote speakers was our diversity and inclusion manager, who gave an overview of our plan, because I think it's really important to talk about that. Interestingly, Jenny and I have had some conversations about the results of the assessment centre and who maybe did better in the virtual arena and what that might look like and what we might need to think about going forward. So I think it's going to be an important topic to consider. And without giving the results away, there was some strengths that maybe wouldn't have flown through as much in the physical environment. So I definitely think it needs consideration and some thought, and I think it's going to be very important going forward. Don't know if anyone's got anything to add on that.
Yeah. I think almost that nervousness potentially. I think you know, some underrepresented groups may perhaps sometimes lack that confidence with certain things. That it's again allowing for that more probably relaxed environment, giving way more reassurance than you think you need to make sure that all groups feel they have that opportunity to display the strengths that they have. But yeah, it's definitely a really interesting topic that probably needs more kind of looking into as it goes through the year.
I also think it's about, and you can build into the diversity inclusion, I guess, question by thinking about equal share of voice. So even with introversion, extroversion, it needs more thought in the virtual environment. So really to think about how we include everyone in the conversation. You'll always get, you know, the candidates who are real extroverts, and when the CEO gives, you know, a talk, are the first ones to ask questions and, you know, share their profile. You don't again see the non-verbal body language of the more quieter, more reserved candidates. So you really need to think about that and how you bring everyone in. I mean, for our CEO, when he finished talking, we were really key, and we had a couple of small assessment centres that at the end, before he left, he saw everyone. So at least everyone got on the screen. Just really, it does need a lot of thought about how you bring everyone.
Because we adapted our group tasks as well actually this year as well, to make sure where I guess previously we may have done ones where it is more of a group discussion, we actually reverted back to what we will have done maybe 2 or 3 years ago, which is where there's an element of the beginning of the task where they all get given kind of an element themselves each that's different, where they have to read it to the group, which meant that everyone had to be involved, and it gave those opportunities for maybe the quieter ones to kind of get into the group and get chatting, and it kind of relaxed them a little bit more. So there's definitely that kind of thing to think about.
Just a question about Jenny from Kirsty. You were saying, is there not more time for online assessment centres?
Was that what, allowing more time for assessment centres? Sorry, Stephen.
No, is there not more time for the duration of them? I.e., you know, can you get it all done in a day as you would do in a face-to-face assessment centre? Do you split it over days?
Yeah, so I mean, we still managed to do it all in the same, you know, day schedule that we will have done. But I think where maybe we had like more breaks previously, we've just given ourselves buffers for things to overrun. So not a long time. It's usually only kind of 10 minutes and so. And I think we would, to be honest, it kept on schedule better than probably face-to-face, because there was probably less faffing and moving between rooms and things. But it was elements like, I think, you know, the day going on, you know, a whole day, and just allowing for that extra 10-minute buffers around things. But to be honest, actually, interestingly, it didn't mean we struggled to fit it all in, or the day was from 8 AM till 7 PM at all. It's just really thinking about, I guess, your scheduling more than anything, and you may have slightly less luxuries than usual if you want it to run smoothly. Because I have seen some other employers try and put in too many different things in their schedule. You know, I know we had like a diversity and inclusion talk, you know, kind of a bit more about post office, the benefits, and the lunch break. We've seen other employers potentially try and put in maybe another 3 sessions on different elements within the business, and it just actually overwhelms candidates. So it's kind of stripping it back a bit to go, what's key, so you can allow those buffers around tasks.
Alan, sorry, were you going to come in earlier? Did I talk over you?
No, that's fine. I was just sort of saying a couple of the points that Jackie and Jenny had made, that I think we found that having a bit of structure in virtual assessment centres to the point of making sure everybody gets airtime, and also actually just giving some quite clear rules of engagement about, you know, how to put so that you want to chip in and make sure that you've got some sort of etiquette about how it's going to work is really valuable, just to make it run well, and you don't, you know, it stops the particular individual dominating, which is obviously what you want to avoid, right?
Yeah, it was basic housekeeping, absolutely, Alan. You know, we're saying, you know, if you've got any questions during the presentation, there's a chat function. So being really clear about when to come in and the different mechanisms to have conversations. So you're absolutely right. You still get another person who doesn't do that, but that's okay. That's okay.
I've had some more questions on process, but I think we might come back to those if we've got a bit of time at the end. Rachel, I wanted to hear from you, and I guess maybe we can go a bit go a bit broader again. So, would you like to just tell us about your overall strategy, what the drivers are, and any pivots you might have had to make because of COVID-19?
There's been a few. I'll try not to repeat some of the things that Jackie's already mentioned. Obviously, the world of virtual assessment centres has kept us on our toes for the last few months. In terms of our broader strategy, I think for us, candidate experience is at the heart of everything that we do. You know, we're recruiting people who are going to be moving into very challenging roles on the front line of policing, people that haven't perhaps thought of policing before, and we're looking at people that are very mission and kind of vision driven, who are going to want it to kind of get in and make a massive impact on the communities that they're working with over our 2-year programme. So for us, really keeping that candidate at the heart of all our decision making, making sure we're building a real insight into the role through our recruitment process, so they're aware of the challenges of the role, and you know, that's not something that we shy away from, but they're also really excited about that as well, and prepared for what's going to hit them when they do, you know, land in force and start after our training academy. And we want to give them a really positive and lasting impact through our process, so that they, you know, whatever the outcome is, they kind of leave feeling really great about their experience through Police Now. You know, we have a lot of people who have not been through assessment centres before or online assessments. We want them to feel like they've learned something and have grown through their experience in our process. And we also know that this role isn't for everybody. So we want to support people and make sure they feel valued, make sure they feel like they're prepared and informed, but also that for those who do decide this isn't quite the right role for them, that's a decision they can come to through our kind of end-to-end journey and end-to-end processes. Jenny's touched on, we know we do try and map out that whole journey right from attraction through to onboarding and starting our academy. So each time that decision just feels a bit stronger, a bit more committed, a bit more informed, and they're able to kind of come with us through that journey. Another massive part of our strategy is diversity and inclusion. So again, it's been touched on, but for us, that's the kind of foundation of everything we do. So everything's built from the consideration of the groups that are needed in policing. You know, as we've seen in recent months, there's a real need to have a diverse police force. There are lots of groups that aren't as represented in the force as they could be, and we really work to improve the ethnicity, the gender, all many metrics. So, you know, we think about all those things through our process so that we can improve that representation, and also think about the barriers that people bring with them as to why they perhaps haven't thought of policing before, or why they haven't thought that the role of a neighbourhood police officer or a detective is something that they could do. So through that process, we're looking for people that are able to bring those experiences with them into policing, and that we can then create a process that is fair, it's equitable, it helps address those barriers, it helps candidates to think about their communities, their influences, their friends and their family who might be saying to them, you know, perhaps this isn't the right role for you, this isn't something that you could do. How can we equip our candidates to have those conversations as well, whether that's, you know, fear of safety, whether that's the kind of environment that people are working in. And the final thing I'll say about our strategy, and it's definitely something that is on my mind a lot, is our kind of efficiency and our sustainability and scalability. Our targets are doubling year on year. We now have 2 programs. We have multiple start dates as of 2022. So we don't just have one intake a year anymore. And as those numbers grow, we have to make sure we're making really good use of our time, our capacity, that we're being really data-led in our decision making, we're evaluating, we're learning, we're evolving. And I think the last few months has really tested that to the max. You know, what works, what doesn't, you know, what do we make virtual, how do we do that, how do we learn from the data that we're getting, but how are we thinking about long-term sustainability as well? And we've been working a lot on that in the last year to create a process that is sustainable and will help us grow as our targets grow over the next few years.
doubling, that's a huge growth rate, isn't it? Yeah, that's I'm sure that's a very nice situation to be in some ways, but also presents a huge amount of challenges. One of the things that we were going to talk about was your upfront process, which you've invested in heavily, even before ignoring any impacts of coronavirus, etc. Can you just tell us a little more about how it works?
Yeah, so we have an application form, which is essentially an eligibility checker, because to be an officer in the UK, there's quite a few elements of eligibility, whether that's prior criminal convictions, your residency kind of length in the UK. There's quite a long list. So our application form goes through that in a lot of detail. What we've done with that in the last year is streamline it a lot. There are a lot of questions. They can feel quite invasive. We're asking about people's financial history, their family's history, because people go through quite extensive vetting, their medical history as well. And that's the first stage. We ask for people's tattoo pictures and stories and piercings. They're kind of unveiling a lot to us early on. So we have to build trust, and we have to make that as easy as possible for people. So we've done a lot of work to streamline that application form, to make it a better candidate experience, and to make it easier for our team internally to screen as well, because that's a lot of information to go through. So in making those efficiencies in the process, we've managed to decrease the amount of time it took candidates to do that form from average 10 days last year to 2 days. And then for screening, it was taking on average 16 days last year. That's now down to 1.5 days, with a lot more automation and a lot more nuanced kind of flagging systems and things as well. And we have a next wave of improvements coming there. We've got a new ATS coming, so we'll hopefully be able to make more efficiencies there as well. And then once they're through the application form, they do an online assessment. So previously we used more kind of off-the-shelf numerical and verbal reasoning, but then we've been working with Sova to build a bespoke online assessment, which we've used now for the last 2 cohorts that we've had join us. And that was built to really build more of this insight into the role. So it's themed on a week in the life of a Police Now neighbourhood officer or a Police Now detective. It's built using real life scenarios that our officers face every day out, in their roles in their stations. Some of them are really challenging situations, and some of them are real highlights as well, to help people really see the ups and downs of a kind of typical week, if there is one, when you're a police officer. And even things like meetings and answering emails. People don't understand that there's still a day job, there's a desk involved, you have to still go to meetings and things as well. So we want people to feel like they're learning about that role through that process. And we also wanted to introduce more blended assessment. So it uses a mix of SJT questions, personality questions, and then video and written questions as well, to just help us test people in a few more ways. And so hopefully that's fairer. It helps the candidate feel like they've been able to not just see the kind of set SJT scenarios, but also be more responsive to us through the written and video questions as well, show us their potential, show us their passion. So that was something we spent a lot of time on with Sova last year, and we've been using it for the last year now, and that has had really good results, and we're really pleased with the feedback we've had from candidates. We've had thousands and thousands of people sit it, and we're getting really good results on their enjoyment of it and the insight it's giving them into the role, and it has made that feel like a much more personalised part of our process.
And it's something, you mentioned some of the sort of I guess the activities that people do, and then that must generate data and information. So is that something that you can then use? Is that much better now, putting that through your whole process? Yeah,
so we've developed a kind of central operations team in my team to help us understand all the data. We have a lot of data. We have an ATS that gives us lots of data, and we work with Sova on their data. we have a lot, so we've worked to kind of remap all of that this year. So we have new dashboards that kind of tell us everything we want to know. We speak monthly with Sova to look at adverse impact reporting coming from our online assessment. What we try to do is just order it a bit more, and to think about what we're looking at and why. And it's easy to just get overwhelmed with spreadsheets and so many data points, and actually not all of it is useful, and not all of it is useful at that time, after that certain length of time. So we've really tried to take a step back and think about what we're measuring weekly, monthly, quarterly, and at the end of our campaign, so we can react quickly but not be too reactive. and also use that to kind of learn between our programs as well, because we do have 2 programs with very different candidate pools, but we made a lot of efficiencies and learnings from our first, our kind of flagship neighbourhood programme, and we've then been live for recruitment for our detective programme throughout the pandemic, and we were able to make a lot of changes and amendments to that, you know, for this campaign, rather than have to wait to allow our next launch in September for the next neighbourhood campaign. And that's been really valuable because it's helped us implement things quite quickly, without hopefully getting too bogged down in data. But you know, Alan and I chat every month about the online assessment, how that's performing, and it's helped us build this amazing picture over that year.
I'll come to Alan in a moment. So just before I do, I was just interested to know, Rachel, looking forward, how do you see your recruitment process evolving? I'm sure coronavirus will still have an impact. You mentioned you're doubling your numbers, so I was just interested how you sort of see it playing out.
We have big plans. We're trying to not take on too much at once, but that hasn't really worked out. So what we're doing now, we've spent the last year looking at the application form and online assessment. We're now redesigning our assessment centre. So we're really proud of our assessment centre. It's been an amazing assessment centre for our programme for the last 2 years, but we feel like now is the time to turn our attention to that and to look at the next kind of phase of the assessment centre. So we're doing that at the moment ahead of our launch in September. So we're applying a lot of the same kind of logic we've applied to the online assessment to the assessment centre. So really thinking about how we are building that insight into the role, how we're assessing people in multiple different ways, how we are helping people understand the highs and the lows, how we're building the robustness and rigour into that assessment centre, how we're creating that supportive environment. So every single one of our candidates currently gets a one-on-one phone call before they attend assessment centre. They also attend group information sessions. We offer additional coaching for underrepresented groups as well. And then we have a lot of information available, hints and tips and videos online too. But as we grow, we can't necessarily offer that one-on-one personalised support to everybody. We just don't have capacity, as much as my team would love to think they could. So we're building a new ATS as well to really help us provide that end-to-end journey in one place, and to provide a lot more dynamic kind of resources for people to access without necessarily needing that one-on-one in person, one-on-one contact from our recruitment team. That could be focused to those that really need it or really want it. Hopefully it'll be a bit more agile, and that allows us to host the entire end-to-end journey in one place rather than a few different kind of platforms that we have at the moment. So assessment centre, new ATS, and we're redeveloping our onboarding strategy as well, introducing a new website, and we're also bringing in a few other kind of platform changes. So it's a busy summer. We are still recruiting for detectives at the moment, and then we're launching in September for our next neighbourhood programme, which will be our biggest ever cohort. So yeah, we're trying to evolve while we deliver, which has definitely been challenging, but I think COVID has at least cut down the commute time. So we've all had more time.
Yes, that's right. Our working days have not got shorter though, have they? With losing the commute time. Fantastic. We could talk about the whole autumn campaign, but I think it'll take us into another rabbit warren, so we'll avoid going there. But thanks for those insights, Rachel. Alan, just turning to you. Rachel's mentioned some of the work you've done, but we've also heard from Jackie as well. You know, both sophisticated employers, sophisticated recruiters that have pivoted quickly, but also now starting to take that longer term view. So, and we've seen that from lots of employers. Now, if I go back to some of our earlier podcasts and webinars talking about organisations that really worked at pace, and I guess just lifted existing materials and put them online. But I was wondering if is online is starting to become the new normal, and we're hearing about maybe this blended approach will be the future. What does this more sophisticated approach look like?
Yes, I mean, I think there's the contributions from everybody so far gives quite a good sense for how the direction that's evolving, and I think some of the points Rachel made on where that takes you with data and insight is particularly key as well. But sort of starting on the practical level, most organisations are going to have they may well have more applications. Police now are perhaps in a slightly unusual position. They've actually got more people to hire. A lot of people might have a lot of applicants and slightly less people to hire. that managing that funnel and getting really good throughput in it is obviously the first stage. But then the biggest change is clearly in the how do you make your kind of virtual assessment center, the things that you would have done face-to-face work really well. And I think what we're kind of seeing is that there's a need for the sort of end-to-end assessment process to completely start to join up. And within that, there are activities like scheduling people into your assessment center that Zoom or Teams is integrated into your virtual assessment center software in all of the data you can get back at the end. The beginning and the end of it are where a lot of the heat in the, let's say, palaver of running this, particularly virtually, is quite problematic. And so those things can be fixed with the right technology, right? As well as being really thoughtful about how you assess virtually and some of the accommodations we were talking about earlier and how you prepare candidates. So getting the wrapping around it from a assessment platform point of view is really key, I think, for people to make sure you can spend your time talking to the candidates, recruiting them, assessing them, and not spending all your time trying to figure out how to sort of, do the Zoom and spreadsheets option, which is what maybe a lot of people did immediately. There are sort of better ways of doing that, which I know we and others are on that journey, and actually keep learning quickly is probably a key point to add to that. Yeah.
Is there something very different about the nature of an online exercise as opposed to a face-to-face? I'm not an occupational psychologist, so I really stretch the imagination. But part of the thing that I'm sort of niggling me at the moment is, does the very core of an exercise need to be different because it's delivered online to face-to-face, or are broadly the underlying principles the same?
No, I think that's a very good question. I think what we're finding is that the style of how you do it is quite different, right? But the things that you need to assess generally are the same. A lot of the conversations we've been involved in, in the earlier stages of lockdown were revolved around, right, it's still really important we assess the things that matter to us, our competencies, our capabilities, whatever. And we have to get that quality of hire, we have to get the diversity right, that's really critical. But we're going to have to, very rapidly adopt to the virtual environment. So I think the qualities you're measuring don't change in general. There may be some shifts because of more virtualization. But alongside that, what you need in the exercise is actually you can generally take what you've got and with relatively light touch adaptation, get it to work in a virtual environment pretty well. Group exercises is probably the most significant. We touched on the practical side. I think one thing we found is having the group in is a bit like we have it here actually, that you have all of the participants can see each other and talk, and the assessors are probably not on camera and can see them. That works pretty well as long as you've got the right etiquette about how it's going to work. There's a really practical point here in the world going forward that our graduate entrants probably are going to be doing a lot of conference calls like this anyway, so it's a pretty realistic job preview actually. So yeah, I don't think the core is fundamentally different, but there's a lot of adaptation of style that you need to do.
Got it. And Rachel mentioned this, and also you touched on it as well, Alan, is that data side of things. I guess is in a more online world, we've just been doing some work on virtual careers fairs and things for the autumn, and actually one of the aspects of that will be there will be so much more data readily available to recruiters. Rachel hinted at sometimes too much to be able to actually meaningfully use it at any one time. I wonder, do you see any opportunities for utilising data better, whether it's improved decision making or a richer candidate experience?
Yes, I mean, I think there's a piece around how you personalise the candidate experience, which is one strand, but there's also a piece around within the recruitment space, the kind of solutions for things like testing or video interviews, etc. They've often been, as the software folks call them, point solutions. They do one particular task, but you end up with these little pockets of data that are not joined up. And I think that transition to getting access to all the information at the same time, which Rachel was kind of alluding to, that's a critical first step to then get the data so you can see it all in one go, which needs the right technology to do it. And then the next critical question is, well, what are the insights you need? Because you don't want to be swamped in the information. What you really want to know is, what are the key drivers of my process, whether that's efficiency or D&I or quality, and really work out how to crystallize the dashboarding of what you want to look at. And I think that's the journey that will evolve. There's, you know, in marketing, tools like HubSpot are really good at this. I think that our HR tech industry is, you know, moving forward, but it's not as advanced as other areas, and I think that will make a massive difference for resourcing. The better that becomes. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, just got some questions coming through. I don't know who'd be best to answer this one actually. From Annie, and she talks about actually students, and one of the challenges they found with some students is actually they don't like turning the cameras on. They'd rather not for a variety of reasons. Has anybody got any suggestions about how you actually might be able to encourage students to turn their cameras on, if this is a problem that any of you have faced at all?
A thought I would have on it, and it kind of speaks to what Jackie and Jenny were saying earlier, is around comfort. I would question why someone doesn't feel able to put the camera on, and I think in a lot of cases it would be that they either are not comfortable in the technology, that the technology can support, you know, having the camera on, but also that their environment is not one that they think would be kind of suitable for an assessment centre. And that is where I feel really strongly that it's on us to make people feel comfortable to know that it doesn't matter what your background is, it doesn't matter if you're in a shared space, it doesn't matter what you're wearing. I don't mind if someone's wearing a suit or not, because they're at home in the middle of a global pandemic. Like, they've done an amazing job to even get that far. It's okay. I'd rather they were comfortable and able to show us their potential and able to perform and show us that they really want this job. So for me, I think I would really think about the materials and the advice you're providing beforehand to make sure people know that we're not assessing your background or the way that you look physically. We're assessing your skills against competencies, and that is a good starting point. If it's around technology capability, that's a slightly different thing, and we've talked about things like testing there and just helping people know what technology they need and how to really equip themselves from that side there. And I think if it's anything other than those two, it sounds like it'd be quite specific to that individual, and having them be able to contact the recruitment team and talk through their individual circumstance would hopefully unpick a bit as to what the issue was there.
And I think I would echo that. I think it's a joint responsibility. So for the recruitment team to really warm up candidates, to manage expectations, maybe to, you know, lead by example, and then for us as employees on the day to also lead by example and set the expectations. And I think, you know, as long as we're setting the expectations about it is different and it's okay, both pre and during, then I think it does tend to break down barriers. It is a shift for some people, probably for some people on this webinar. I guess you just have to get on with it, and I think for many of us will have been on that journey as well. It's not something that everyone particularly enjoys. It's how you adapt and you give others confidence to do the same.
I think it's making it human, isn't it, Jackie? I think one thing post-op
totally.
well is like you don't want to make yourselves like a clown or, you know, just ridiculous at the beginning, but equally sometimes the assessor's just saying, do you know what, I'm looking a bit of a mess today, or actually I'm really sorry about my background, or I can't get my camera to work. It can really reassure candidates to go, okay, actually that's okay, and saying to the candidates, actually that's fine. I think went quite.
Yeah, I mean, we had a little bit of fun with it. You know, we had some of our assessors had backgrounds from the office, so we were trying to replicate the culture. And we had, you know, we briefed our assessors as well to talk about the expectations of being different and candidates maybe being uncomfortable because it feels more one-on-one, it feels more lonely. So it's really thinking about how you can encourage your assessors to break down those barriers as well. I think all of those things together can really help.
Yeah, I think there's a piece here about this cultural norm about what this is like in a work context. You know, I think, you know, we've all been probably spending a lot more time on Zoom or whatever than we all perhaps want to, but you kind of get the hang of it quite quickly. But there is somebody's child comes in, or somebody's housemate comes in, or whatever, all of these things that can happen. The expectation of the need for formality hasn't quite been resolved yet culturally. I think, you know, I think you've got people are saying you need to set the lead for that, I think, and let people know a bit of stuff happening is not a problem, you know, in that we can get people comfortable so they don't feel embarrassed or whatever. I think it's really important.
Yeah, I think it's important to say that, you know, you're sharing your home, your workplace is in your home, and really sharing that and saying it's different. It isn't the norm. It may be the new norm, but actually 6 months ago that wouldn't have been the expectations for the majority. So they're not alone as well. I think that's really important to have that empathy and understanding that it's been a shift. Hopefully that helps.
A question that I had for you specifically, Jackie, and somebody was asking if you could, I think you mentioned this earlier, the backup plans you have for events, and just if you could elaborate on that a little bit more. You know, what are those things you have in your back pocket if something does go a little bit wrong?
There's a couple of things. I think first of all, it's having a bit of a backup team. So actually having some people who are ready and available to step in on the day. It's certainly having someone in the background who can manage the technology. So someone who's on point for that. Something else that really worked well for us was for facilitators, assessors and the tech guys. We had a WhatsApp group, because you forget you're using your main device to run a facilitated session, but actually you need a way of communicating throughout the day. So we found that worked really well, and there was some definite scrambling behind the scenes, which wasn't as obvious to the candidates as it was to us. So really, you know, that communication and infrastructure that supports some plan B in terms of assessors, tech, those things really work. And I think Jenny mentioned it also, it's the flexibility of timing. So we finished early a couple of times and it was just, don't come to the next room yet, grab a comfort break, get some fresh air, have a rest break and then come back. So just adding in that extra time to really manage the more rigorous environment that a virtual assessment centre does, because they're moving from virtual room to virtual room. So I think those things were key. Jenny, I don't know if you've got anything to add on to that.
Yeah, and I think not too much really. I think definitely the additional time and stuff made quite a big impact. I think WhatsApp groups interesting actually, or other kind of tools that you've got to group chat to people. We actually did it with the candidates. We did get consent because obviously you're going to be sharing each other's contact details, but in some ways it might sound quite basic, but actually just to sometimes be able to have a whole group where you go to everyone, I don't know, really sorry that the link to the room's down or whatever it may be, it kind of makes it again just a quick and easy tool to communicate to people. And actually, I mean, a great case study, because our second full assessment day, our main facilitator was actually unable to attend. So our backups definitely came into place. And like you say, it feels like a lot of scrabbling, but candidates had absolutely no idea.
Yeah, just on that, so we've been running 4 assessment centres a week for the last 8 weeks for our detective programme. So I think all the things you've mentioned are great. Our assessors love their WhatsApp group. They're using it outside of assessment centres now, so it's taken on a life of its own. The only thing I'd add to what you've mentioned is, and it's to the point around not panicking, what we have done is run some kind of backup mornings where if an exercise really just hasn't worked, so if someone's been unable to do their role play or the written task has just not loaded, then we've brought them back to do a kind of 45-minute one-off exercise to redo it on a separate day and to feel comfortable doing that, because by the end they've still done all the assessments. We then make the decision after that follow-up point, and that's worked really well in those occasions where the timetable has then got under quite a lot of stress and it's affecting then other people, and candidates have been really happy to do that. And it's obviously easier for us to do that with our assessors as well than extend the days unnecessarily, because we run a morning and an afternoon session for 12 candidates each, so there isn't a huge amount of flexibility, and I think the mental load on candidates and that extra stress of if they can't get things to work does put people on edge a little bit more. So just having that as an extra backup has really helped.
That's great, thanks. Just an interesting, this came up on a town hall that we did with some employers, and the question of, do you actually need to put in an additional admin support? Because one of the employers we were talking to actually had a bit like you'd have an assessment centre coordinator on the day, but someone who really was just solely responsible for the platform and making sure that everything was working without anything else to distract them. Jackie and Rachel, is that something that you've both put in place as well?
Per assessment centre, we have a facilitator who tends to look after the candidates, and then we have an AC manager who looks after the assessors and the timetable. So we've kept we do that in person. We've kept that digitally as well, but we use an online we've been using the Sova online digital assessment centre. So if there were any issues with the platform, and there have been the occasional thing where we've lost interview notes, the AC manager would pick that up. On days where everything's running smoothly, they can just crack on with their job and you know, not worry too much about what's happening. But we've definitely found having some extra people around to help and to just jump in has been great, especially when people have needed more support. But I'd say that's more us as a management team have been quite mindful of the days that assessment centres are on, to just give the facilitator and manager a bit more support if they've needed, rather than having extra. We haven't had any extra admin, I think, because we were using the digital platform anyway. We flipped our AC online within 24 hours. Everything, we don't have a group session, for example, everything flipped actually quite simply. There were some teething issues in the first week, but like it did actually, for us, quite luckily worked fairly simply. But I think in a general principle is give the staff, give the time to just have a bit of backup.
It's similar for us, even though we changed the medium by which we delivered the assessment centres, we would still have one person on point focusing on that for a certain period of time to make sure that everything end to end all fit, joined together, checking in with everyone, and we just replicated that really. So it wasn't more, it was just different, similar to Rachel.
And I think actually one point on that almost is I could absolutely see in these scenarios maybe people listening to this that are maybe in kind of more individual roles thinking, oh my God, this just feels like so much to think about and almost all these negatives. And actually in the 9 times out of 10 they work well, to be honest. At the moment, luckily 10 times out of 10 they run really, really smoothly. It's just thinking about things.
Yeah.
And I think it can almost be overthought and really overwhelming. And actually, if we all just talk to each other sometimes and ask each other what's gone wrong, how can we help each other, rather than kind of trying to keep our secrets, actually really supports each other a bit, and they run really smoothly.
I'm very conscious of time. We're nearly out of time, so I'm just going to have one last quick question to you all. Rachel and Alan, I hadn't prepped you for this one, so I'll go to Jackie and Jenny first. So don't worry, it's nothing too dramatic. Good. Just if you had a top tip for kind of employers listening to this around how they could adapt to the new environment they're operating, just to do what's the first top tip that comes to mind. Jackie, can I go to you first? What would yours be?
Mine would be to think about the mix of the agenda, to make sure you have enough representation of your culture, time for the guys to not just be thinking about the tasks, and also to give them some downtime together. So for instance, for us, one of the things that we replicated that I thought was really important, we got good feedback on, was we had graduate lunch, and we had some of our current grads join the candidates for lunch, and that was in a closed environment just for them. But I guess that's a detail, but in summary, have a mixed agenda that isn't all task focused, because you do need to really break it up and think about the mix and giving them some share of voice.
Good tip. Jenny, what would yours be?
My top tip, I think, is just allow yourself some time. I think our biggest stress for us and our clients has been people thinking they can turn it around in a week. I mean, Rachel, amazing that you did it in 24 hours. That blew my mind. Is we've all got so much to think about at the moment. Onboarding, redesigning materials, everything virtual. Like it's thrown us all. Is just give yourself a bit more time. Allow a good couple of weeks before the actual day to have it ready, to allow for those demos and training sessions and things, and it will go absolutely fine.
Yeah, there was just
Rachel, have you sprung this question on you? Is it?
Well, yeah. The reason I had to be 24 hours is because we only had we had a week and a half left to finish assessment centres before a kind of major pre-employment check deadline for vetting and medicals and things. So it was a needs must. Give yourself weeks if you can. My tip would be just remember the candidate. I think of it end to end. Like the assessment centre is now virtual, but they're still going through a whole process. What's happening before, what's happening after, how do you build that kind of keep the candidate at the heart of everything you're doing, so that not only do they have a good experience on the day, but they leave they leave that ready to accept an offer, or if they're not successful, you know, to still feel positively about everything that's happened up until that point, and to not get too focused on just the mechanics, the staff side of the virtual delivery you're now having to do.
Yeah, good.
Thank you, Rachel. And Alan, is there anything that you'd like to end us with?
Yes, well, I think sort of, you know, probably sort of building on the points made, I think it's really easy to often get caught up in the process of reacting quickly, which obviously we've all been absolutely been through that. But there's a kind of question that you can still ask, which is, what are we trying to achieve here? And there's usually some version of quality of hire and fairness in what do we actually want the outcome to be, and how do we make this a candidate experience which is genuinely human. We've talked about this quite a bit in different ways. It's pretty different, but we've got to make it a genuinely human and engaging candidate experience. And just if you kind of maybe have those two things in your mind, then redesign it quickly, that's fine. But you know, that it really helps to frame it in those terms, I think.
Fantastic. That's an excellent session. We're on the hour now, so we'll end it there. I can see some people starting to drop off because they've got then either to grab a bite of lunch or jump onto the next Teams or Zoom meeting. To all our panelists, to Rachel, Jackie, Jenny, and Alan, thank you very much. Really appreciate you taking the time out to do this. Yeah, I'm conscious that we're all ridiculously busy at the moment, so we very much do appreciate it. As I said at the start, all of you that are logged on to this webinar, you will get a copy of this recording, so you'll be able to go back and catch up on anything that you missed. Also, please feel free to share that amongst your peers. And also visit our website, because some of the subjects we touched on lightly here will go into a bit more detail on other webinars and podcasts. So please tap into that library, because there's plenty more information out there. So unfortunately, we're not doing this live. So sorry, we're not doing this in front of an audience. So it'll have to be a virtual round of applause. But thank you very much all for taking part, and those of you for joining in. And hopefully we'll talk to you all very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.